Clint Eastwood took the stage in Dallas, Texas's Lone Star Arena, just him in an eerily solemn quiet that seemed sacrosanct with no fanfare or introduction. He was wearing a faded gray suit that was glowing silver when the lights cut through the silence. He had a whitened hair, steel cold, piercing eyes, and an inscrutable face, the expression of a man who had seen too much and spoken too little. He remained silent. He was not required to. 3 minutes prior, the two-time Oscar winner Robert Dairo, who was gregarious, well-groomed, and ravenous, had strolled out in front of those same lights and grinned while looking directly into the camera. Clint Eastwood is the voice of a dead America, he said, a relic in cowboy boots clinging to a past no one cares about. The audience erupted in laughter, whistles, boos, and shouts as if it were gospel. Half the room cheered with their gaze fixed on the figure in the shadows. The other half held their breath. Clint, too, he remained still as if the room were his and he was merely unaware of it. He stood there as though time had stopped around him. He had no intention of arguing. Winning an argument was not his goal. He was present because when falsehoods are praised, quiet might occasionally turn into a crime. There was more to this than a chat show segment. Hollywood hype and traditional reality were at odds in this clash between two titans in two eras. Robert Dairo, who was always acting, had a sharp suit and a sharper tongue. Clint Eastwood was standing on the other side, silent, composed, and deadly in the manner that only a man could be who needs to demonstrate that everything is possible. Clint would later respond with 7 words that reverberated more loudly than any speech. When asked what he thought of it all: "You came to perform. I came to put a stop to it. Don't introduce yourself. There aren't any opening remarks. There are just 2 men, one vying for attention, and the other prepared to block it." When Robert Dairo took the stage, the lights were sufficiently lowered to provide a striking contrast. Every seam of his black suit, which was well-tailored, purposeful, and immaculate, shouted his presence. He came in style, dressed in tailored silk rather than just strolling in. Dairo, a 2-time Oscar winner with a history based on mobsters, antiheroes, and hazy moral boundaries, walked like a guy who had withstood the Hollywood flames and come out on top. However, he wasn't present to speak tonight. He came to lay a ledge to rest. With the assurance of a Broadway star, he turned the microphone upright, gripped it like an old friend, looked directly at Clint Eastwood, and then carefully swept the crowd like a general claiming the battlefield. "Let's not act like this." There is a complete silence in the studio. Smirking, Robert Dairo takes the stage. His heavy New York accent pierces the room like a butcher's blade as he starts. "There is no hero in Clint Eastwood. He represents an America that ought to have been abandoned long ago." The studio reverberates with claps, tension, and gasps. The left echoes with cheers from the right. There was dead quiet. A few boos pierced through, uncertain and harsh. A few cheer. People who have been humiliated in their own houses fold their arms with a tone full of disdain. Dairo sneers, "This man talks about grit and values like he invented them." He tilts toward the microphone. "However, when the nation was on fire, where was he when we were speaking out, marching, and putting our lives, livelihoods, and reputations at stake? He was seeing the fire from a safe distance on a peaceful property in Carmel." In the first row, a veteran crosses his arms. A college student broadcasts live. The host, Jack Reeves, looks away from the camera, expecting for someone to interrupt, but nobody does. Dairo moves slowly and deliberately around the stage, much like a prosecutor circles a guilty witness. He yells, "It's been years since he produced a fantastic film. He considers a frown to be wisdom." He enters like John Wayne's ghost, but all I see is a guy who is too scared to face the future. Whistles and clapping erupt from the left side of the room. They shout, "Say it louder." Cell phones illuminate. Tweets are quick. "Dead cowboy" becomes popular. Dairo turns to face Clint, not the audience. The finger is pointed. Sharp voice, "You refer to it as loyalty. I refer to it as obstinate pride. You speak about truth as though it were your birthright. However, Mr. Eastwood, the fact is that you no longer represent the people. You are only a reflection of a world that has forgotten how to adapt." "The chamber to the right stays," says a man. "Let him speak. His earned his place." Dairo said. "Another is not a relic," mutters a woman along the aisle. "He is genuine." Dairo, however, does not recall. His eyes shine with something deeper than confidence as he smirks. "Hunger, perhaps. Now he was after blood. You wish to protect this nation. All right, however, don't act as though remaining mute is a virtue. You want to appear and play rescuer since you were silent for too long." A showman in full flight, he halted and raised both arms wide, resembling a Broadway stage beau. Is not looking for the truth because he misses the acclaim. His hair then a glimmer for a moment. The smirk twitched as he turned to face Clint. Perhaps it was the way Clint remained still, his jaw fixed, his gaze steadfast as stone. Perhaps it was a crowd holding its breath instead of roaring. Or perhaps it was something deeper, a fleeting insight that he could have overreached himself. Dairo, however, dismissed it. "He tried to kill, so feel free to express yourself, Mr. Cowboy. Let's see whether the myth can hold up for the time being." The Chamber splintered open, roars, shouts, cheers, and applause. It was electric energy, split, tense, and uncontrollable. A little country divided in two halves. Clint Eastwood stood still and unfazed in the center of that maelstrom, not even blinking, not snarling, simply waiting. Clint Eastwood was silent for a while, like a gunslinger relaxing before the last draw. He gently leaned forward and rested both hands on the table in front of him. The room fell silent. The air seems to wait as well. Then he raised his head. He added, "You said I missed the applause." In a low, growly, and scathing voice, "Son, I've walked away from more standing ovations than you've ever earned." A pause. The audience shifted. "I'm not here to get claps, men like you talk too much and don't recall enough, which is why I came here." He swiveled slightly, meeting Dairo's gaze. "You stand on this stage pretending to speak for the future, but all I hear is ego dressed up as progress." Then he leaned slightly back. He spoke in a clear, calm voice. "Bob, let's rewind the tape. Before the outcry, before hashtags, when truth didn't require praise, you didn't either." Clint gestured to the production team with one hand behind him. A screen sprang to life. 2009 was the shaky timestamp. Sitting in a CNN interview was Robert Dairo. His tone was warm and his hair was darker. "I believe Clint Eastwood embodies a unique quality in Hollywood, quiet, honorable, and true leadership." The video halted, silently frozen. Clint's tone had sharpened, and he turned back to Dairo. "You did it, Bob. That was before you were more of an activist than an actor, before praise began to take precedence over the truth." There was a deep rumbling throughout the crowd. Once more phones rang. The tide was turning. "Clint didn't speak louder. He didn't have to. You refer to me as the past. I have witnessed our nation in parts during peace and during war. Instead of actors who lose their cool in heated arguments on Twitter, I've dealt with children who bled out in jungles. You claim that I was too silent. No, Bob, I paid attention. This nation has forgotten how to do it." With his gaze fixed on Niro, Clint took a step toward the table. "You want to throw date while standing there, all right. However, keep in mind who laid the foundation for where you are now standing." It was a blast from the conservative side. Some neutral heads even started to nod. For a brief moment, Dairo's grin faltered. The last blow was then administered by Clint. "Ghost don't return to speak despite what you said about me. They returned to haunt." The room froze and then blew up. Cheers. A whistle startled as the host Jack Reeves blinked and leaned into his microphone. He said, "Well, the cow's not dead yet." When Dairo attempted to talk, the audience stopped paying attention. No more. Since Clint Eastwood had said something, even time pauses to listen when he talks. Even if Robert Dairo was still upright now, his breathing had become labored. Just enough of the former fire, swagger, and conviction had disappeared to be noticed. He gestured to Clint with a finger that was not sharp. His voice had changed in tone. "Yes, there is frustration, but there is also something more subdued, something more akin to dread." He said, "You think you're clever." The remarks were harsher than they ought to have been. "You sit there like some prophet on a rocking chair and think your silence makes you deep." The audience shifted, but not in a cheering manner. This energy wasn't the same as before now. It was doubtful, measured. Some people chuckled, although not very deeply. Tiny, snug ones. Some remained still. They had stopped listening to Dairo. Clint was being observed by them all, waiting for a reckoning, not for a reply. Then Clint made a move slowly and deliberately. He leaned forward, even though his chair's leather only squeaked once. The whole room became more constrained. It was louder than the microphone compared to Dairo. It was louder. He didn't speak louder. He didn't. Clint stated in a voice as solid as stone, "I didn't come here to be clever. I came here because men like you keep talking until the truth gets buried under applause." With a sneer, Dairo crossed his arms in self-defense. Even it, though seemed phony, Clint did not flinch, though his tone stayed steady. Each phrase struck like a slow-moving hammer. Clint's voice was sharp as he said, "You make fun of what you don't comprehend. You believe that the strongest people shout the loudest. However, understanding when and what not to say is what truly demonstrates strength." He got up, not quickly, not really dramatic. "Simply be steady, like a guy who, long before the lights came on, had been burdened by his words. Your stage is over. You had your moments, your films, and your admirers." He hesitated long enough for the quiet to grow. He then turned to face the cameras and the nation observing from outside. "Not Dairo, however. I'm not here to receive a standing ovation. I'm here because I see a nation that applauds when it performs, but has lost the ability to hear the truth." Quiet, heavy, complete. His eyes met Dairo as he turned back to face him. "You called me outdated, but maybe what's outdated is mistaking noise for wisdom." It struck like a velvet-wrapped hammer, as though they were also attempting to appreciate the moment. Even the cameras appeared to move more slowly. The air even stopped for him. Dairo stopped. No return, no witty comment. Don't snicker. Clint's words were still lingering in the church like smoke along with the sound of breath. Clint returned to his seat. He didn't sit, though. He didn't turn around. He simply stood there as if he had already ended the game and didn't need to win. A woman with watery eyes covered her mouth with both hands. From close to the second row, she felt a tear slide down her face. Her voice was barely heard when she murmured to the man next to her, his right 2 rows behind her. An old man bent his head. That's not a line. A murmur came from the far back. That's a lesson. Finally, host Jack Reeves leaned toward his microphone with a tone that was almost respectful. Well, if that ain't the cleanest cut I've seen on this stage. The audience was at its breaking point. Cheer to whistle shouts. It was a release rather than merely a reaction, but politics was no longer the focus. There were no sides to it. It has to do with being there. It has to do with something ancient and unchangeable. Over the noise came a voice from the shadows. That's why his Clint Eastwood, not even Robert Dairo, argued. The tension persisted even when the studio lights dimmed. Clint Eastwood stood by himself behind the curtain backstage. No entourage, no fist pumps, no joyous smile. He was alone, fiddling with his coat sleeve as if the stage moment didn't matter. Or perhaps it did. Robert Dairo, meanwhile, remained still in his chair amid the residual heat from the stage lights. He blushed once, commanding, expressive, and dramatic. His hands now shook a little. This was unexpected, not from the guy he had referred to as outmoded Clint Eastwood. However, Clint had not just arrived tonight. He hadn't moved much, just moved the whole room, and the internet would be on fire in 5 minutes or less. Western Lipton Media shared a 40-second snippet shortly after the show concluded. Don't edit, nothing to say. The perfect shot. Clint standing there in the dark, delivering that last razor-sharp line. What's outdated is mistaking noise for wisdom. No music, no sound effects, just the force of the words like thunder. It struck. The hashtag #Eastwood Cuts Deeper became popular throughout the country. In only 4 minutes it was immediately republished by conservative pages. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. Clint just used one phrase to end a Hollywood legend. It wasn't just conservatives, though. It was shared even by seasoned reviewers and impartial voices. What side you on doesn't matter to me. Power was that. No sound, no rage, only honor. That's what our nation is lacking. Then came the memes. One had a red-faced Dairo slumped on his chair, written, "When you try to cancel Clint, and he cancels the entire room." Another Clint is in news, his arms by his sides, his face composed. It says, "Lens don't yell, they wait." The host Jack Reeves shared a behind-the-scenes picture. Clint was only a silhouette disappearing into darkness as he walked down a dark hallway by himself. "I've hosted for 20 years, he captioned. "I've never witnessed a takedown that's silent and brutal." However, the most subtly pivotal moment did not occur on the internet. It took place right before Clint departed. Near the exit, Clint was overtaken by a young stagehand about 19 years old who had barely known him from replays. He said, "Mr. Eastwood," in a quiet, almost apprehensive voice that was something else. After giving him a quick nod, Clint murmured, "Don't follow the noise, kid." Without pausing his gait, pay attention to the weight. Then he vanished into the darkness. Dairo, surrounded by nervous employees, exited the studio late. "Don't push stop, no interviews." One tweet the next morning. "The world still needs voices that speak up for truth." Even though Clint is a good actor, he did speak, was the top response. "You simply couldn't take it." No yelling was heard. "Don't be offensive." No show. Only a few sentences. Final, weighty, and harsh. Clint Eastwood changed from being called a relic to a fresh representation of unwavering fortitude. In less than 24 hours, he stood motionless and stated the truth, not because he battled harder. The repercussions had already started, even if the dust had hardly settled. Commentators on politics stepped in. Clint Eastwood was praised by right-wing media as the embodiment of true American grit, dismissed left-wing pundits. A retired actor pulled out a well-timed publicity stunt, but something more profound had changed behind the scenes. This was more than simply a viral moment. It served as a reminder that in a society full of sound bites, fury and spin, silence still has strength. Clint Eastwood's name shot to the top of search results in a matter of days. The fight was rebroadcast by news networks. Talk radio presenters analyzed each sentence behind closed doors. Both Republican and independent political analysts acknowledged the fact that he didn't simply win the moment. The battlefield was altered by him. There was no denying the repercussions for Robert Dairo. Hollywood's once defiant voice now sounded muted. His interviews became less compelling. His words seemed forced and unauthentic. He was no longer viewed as a fighter, but rather as a guy who had been wounded and never recovered. Even ardent supporters started to falter. One person remarked that he looks more like a character chasing relevance than a man standing for anything real. Clint, however, didn't like the occasion. No tweets, no interviews, no victory lap. "I've said my piece," read a modest remark in a little California newspaper. "A man should only talk when it is really necessary, in my opinion." And perhaps that's why it was significant, because Clint Eastwood didn't raise his voice above the clamor. In a society that is hooked to incessant criticism, he spoke deliberately after waiting for the noise to subside on its own. It has nothing to do with right or left. It has nothing to do with popular hashtags. It was about who stood for something when it mattered and who was taller when the lights came on. The effects went beyond politics. It was intimate. The question, am I listening for truth or just looking for someone who sounds like me, caused millions of people to pause and consider this. Furthermore, it wasn't limited to the elderly. I didn't grow up watching Clint Eastwood movies, but last night I saw what real strength looks like, and it wasn't yelling. A 22-year-old podcaster said in a tweet, Clint Eastwood didn't only prevail in a debate at that quiet moment on stage, he served as a reminder of America's past and potential. Future Clint Eastwood taught us that often the quietest voice has the most impact in a society when everyone is vying for attention. He didn't return the clap. He didn't follow the fad. He arrived to serve as a reminder to America of what true strength, discipline, and respect once looked like. Just presence, no yelling or rage. He maintained his composure, remained focused, and demonstrated that you don't need to shout to stand tall, and perhaps it is the lesson we should learn going ahead. Politics has nothing to do with this. It has nothing to do with Hollywood. It was about the type of persona that says less but conveys more. Let us ask you this. Have you ever been undervalued or assessed based on your history, age, or silence? Have you ever had to demonstrate that being still is not a sign of weakness? Shouting is never as strong as standing still, listening, and waiting. Tell us if this story resonated with you on a personal level. Leave a comment, share your story, and let's remind this generation and each other that morality is still important, because the most truthful voice ultimately reverberates the longest, not the loudest one. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.